What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors sits down for what should be a simple chat about his latest film project? In just 25 seconds, a single dismissive comment would spiral into one of the most shocking exits in talk show history. Hugh Grant arrived at the studio that morning, expecting nothing more than the usual promotional circuit. He had done hundreds of these interviews over his decades-long career. Sit down, smile, answer a few questions about the new film, share a charming anecdote or two, and be on his way. It was routine, comfortable, safe. The set was bright and cheerful, the kind of atmosphere designed to put guests at ease. Lorraine Kelly sat in her usual spot, surrounded by her panel. Sarah Mitchell, the show's entertainment correspondent, sat to her left, flipping through notes. Marcus Webb, a lifestyle columnist, was on her right, already wearing that practiced smile, television personality's perfect over time. And then there was Diana Price, the show's newest addition, a social media influencer turned television personality who had made a name for herself with hot takes and controversial opinions. Hugh settled into the guest chair across from them, his publicist hovering just off camera. The makeup artist did a final powder touch. The floor manager counted down. 3, 2, 1. The lights were warm on his face, the familiar weight of the microphone pack at his waist. Everything seemed normal, professional, standard. "Well, good morning, everyone," Lorraine began, her Scottish accent lilting through her opening remarks. "We are absolutely thrilled to have with us this morning the one and only Hugh Grant. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us." "Morning," Hugh replied with a polite nod. "Thanks for having me." "So," Lorraine leaned forward slightly, "let's talk about this new film. You're playing a rather different character this time around, aren't you?" Hugh nodded, settling into the familiar rhythm of a promotional interview. "Yes, it's quite a departure from what people might expect. It's a drama, quite serious actually. I play a father dealing with loss and trying to reconnect with his estranged daughter. It's heavy material, but I was drawn to the depth of the character." Right, Lorraine nodded absently, glancing down at her notes. "And you worked with director Patricia Morrison on this, is that correct?" "Yes, Patricia is extraordinary. Her vision for this project was so clear and compelling. She really pushed all of us to dig deeper, to find the authentic emotion in every scene." Lorraine made a non-committal sound. "That's quite a shift from the romantic comedies everyone knows you for, isn't it? I mean, that's really what you're known for, the charming, bumbling Englishman routine." There was something in her tone, not quite mocking, but dismissive. Hugh's smile tightened, just a fraction. "Well, I've actually done quite a variety of roles over the years. But yes, I suppose some people might remember the earlier films most vividly." Diana Price jumped in, her voice carrying that performative enthusiasm of someone who loves stirring the pot. "But let's be honest, Hugh. Those rom-coms are what pay the bills, aren't they? I mean, without Four Weddings and Notting Hill, would we even be talking to you right now?" The shift in tone was jarring. Hugh's expression tightened, though he maintained his composure. "I'm not sure I follow your question." "Well," Diana continued, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you made your name doing a very specific type of role. Light, charming, unthreatening. Now you're trying to be taken seriously. It's a pattern we see all the time with actors of a certain age." Hugh blinked, taken aback by the bluntness. I'm grateful for those films, certainly. They were wonderful experiences, and I'm proud of them. But I think reducing an entire career to just 2 movies is a bit simplistic." Lorraine nodded along with Diana, a knowing look passing between them. "But Diana does have a point, doesn't she? You're trying to reinvent yourself at what, 60 years old? That's quite late in the game for a transformation." "I'm actually 64, Hugh said quietly. "And I'm not trying to reinvent myself. I'm simply continuing to work, to challenge myself, to grow as an artist. Isn't that what we're all supposed to do?" "Oh, come on," Diana laughed, but it was sharp, cutting. We're all friends here. You can admit it. You've been coasting on that same charming persona for decades. Hugh's hands gripped the armrests of his chair slightly. Coasting is an interesting word choice. I've made over 40 films. I've worked with some of the most talented directors and actors in the industry. I've taken on challenging roles in independent cinema, television, all sorts of projects. That's not coasting. That's working. Working? Sure, Lorraine interjected. But are you succeeding? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you peaked in the 90s, and you've been trying to recapture that magic ever since. Sarah Mitchell looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. Diana, I think what Hugh is trying to explain is that he's evolved as an actor. Evolved? Lorraine let out a small laugh, exchanging a glance with Diana. Is that what we're calling it? Hugh's jaw tightened. He could feel the energy in the room shifting. This wasn't banter. This was something else. I'm not sure I understand what you're implying, he said carefully. Well, Lorraine leaned back in her chair with an air of someone settling in for a good gossip session. I think what we're all wondering is whether this sudden shift to serious drama is genuine, or just a bit of a midlife crisis. You know, trying to prove something when maybe you should just stick to what you're good at. The words hung in the air. Hugh stared at her, processing what he'd just heard. Marcus Webb cleared his throat awkwardly. I don't know if that's entirely fair, Lorraine. The man's been nominated for BAFTAs for dramatic work. Oh, nominations! Diana waved her hand dismissively. Everyone gets nominated for something these days. Doesn't mean you're actually good at it. I'm sorry, Hugh said slowly, his voice measured, but you could hear the restraint it was taking. I came here to talk about a film I'm passionate about, a project that meant a great deal to me, and the entire cast and crew. I didn't come here to be insulted. Lorraine's eyes flashed. Insulted? Oh, don't be so sensitive. We're just having a conversation. If you can't handle a little honesty, maybe television interviews aren't for you anymore. Honesty? Hugh's voice rose slightly. You call that honesty? You've spent the last 5 minutes dismissing my entire body of work, suggesting I'm having some sort of crisis, and implying I'm not talented enough to take on dramatic roles. That's not honesty. That's rudeness dressed up as candor. Sarah tried again to smooth things over. Look, I think we're all just trying to understand your artistic journey. Perhaps we could talk about what drew you to this particular role. But Lorraine wasn't done. Artistic journey, she repeated with a snort. That's generous. Look, Hugh, the reality is that you're a certain age now. The romantic leading man roles have dried up, and you're trying to reinvent yourself. It's transparent. It's what happens to all actors when they hit a certain point. We've seen it 1,000 times. Lorraine, Marcus interjected, his discomfort now obvious. I really think we should move on to something else. No, Hugh said, his voice now carrying an edge. I'd like to hear more about Lorraine's theories on my career. Please, do go on. Tell me more about how transparent and predictable I am. Lorraine straightened in her chair, clearly not expecting to be challenged. Well, if you insist, I think you're clinging to relevance. The industry has moved on. Audiences have moved on. And instead of gracefully accepting that, you're chasing after prestige projects to try and prove you're more than just a pretty face from the 90s. Diana nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. It's quite sad, really. You should just embrace who you were and stop trying to be something you're not. Who I was. Hugh's voice was quiet now, but there was steel in it. Who I was. I'm sitting right here. Present tense. Still working. Still acting. Still passionate about my craft. But according to you, I should just accept being put in a box and stay there? It's not a box, Lorraine said with exaggerated patience, as if explaining something simple to a child. It's reality. You had your moment. You were very successful at a particular type of film. That's nothing to be ashamed of. But pretending you're suddenly this serious dramatic actor is just delusional. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Marcus was staring at the floor, The crew behind the cameras had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Hugh took a long, slow breath. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, but the anger was unmistakable. Do you know what's actually delusional? Thinking you have any right to tell me what I am or am not capable of. Thinking that because you have a platform and a television show, you're somehow qualified to reduce someone's life work to a punchline. Thinking that mean-spirited commentary is the same thing as insightful journalism. Oh, please, Lorraine rolled her eyes dramatically. Don't play the victim. You're a wealthy, privileged actor who's had an incredibly fortunate career. Forgive me if I don't feel sorry for you because someone finally told you the truth. The truth, Hugh repeated softly. You keep using that word. But what you're offering isn't truth. It's your opinion, and not even a particularly informed one. You haven't seen the film we're discussing. You haven't asked a single meaningful question about it. You haven't shown the slightest interest in the work itself. All you've done is make assumptions and hurl insults. Diana leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the kind of excitement people get when they sense conflict. So what are you saying? That we're not allowed to have opinions about celebrities? That's literally our job. Having opinions is one thing, Hugh said. Being deliberately cruel is another. There's a difference between critique and contempt. And what I've experienced in the last few minutes is pure contempt. Lorraine laughed, but it sounded forced. Contempt? That's quite dramatic. Are you sure you're not just practicing for your new serious role? That did it. Hugh stood up. The microphone pack still clipped to his belt, pulled slightly, but he reached down and unclipped it with deliberate care. The studio fell into absolute silence. You could hear the faint hum of the lights overhead. What are you doing? Lorraine asked, her confident facade cracking just slightly. I'm leaving, Hugh said simply. I came here in good faith to discuss a project I care about. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a coordinated attempt to humiliate me. I don't need this. The film doesn't need this. And quite frankly, your viewers deserve better than watching you treat your guests like punching bags for your amusement. Now hold on, Lorraine's voice rose, losing its practiced smoothness. You can't just walk off my show. Watch me, Hugh said, his voice steady, despite the anger coursing through him. I absolutely can, and I absolutely will. This is breach of contract, Lorraine sputtered. You agreed to a full segment. And you agreed to conduct a professional interview, Hugh countered. We both seem to have broken our agreements. I can, Hugh said calmly, placing the microphone pack on the arm of the chair. And I am. You wanted honesty? Here's some honesty for you. This, he gestured around the set, is not journalism. It's not entertainment. It's bullying dressed up in studio lighting and makeup. And I want no part of it. Diana stood up as well, her voice sharp. This is so unprofessional. We were just trying to have a real conversation. Hugh turned to look at her directly. A real conversation involves respect. It involves listening. It involves actually caring about what the other person has to say. None of those things happened here today. What happened here was an ambush. Sarah finally found her voice, standing as well. Hugh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know this was going to go this way. For what it's worth, I thought the film looked brilliant from what I'd seen in the trailers. Hugh's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. Thank you, Sarah. That's kind of you to say. Then he turned back to Lorraine. But your colleague here has made it abundantly clear what she thinks of me and my work. And I see no reason to sit here and provide content for what is clearly meant to be some sort of takedown piece. Lorraine's face had gone red. This is completely out of line. You agreed to come on this show. You have a responsibility to see the interview through. A responsibility? Hugh's eyebrows rose. I have a responsibility to promote my film. Yes. But I also have a responsibility to myself not to be disrespected. And you've made it impossible for me to fulfill the first without abandoning the second. So I'm making a choice. I'm choosing dignity. Marcus stood up too, extending his hand toward Hugh. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call. This got out of hand. Hugh shook his hand briefly. Thank you. Lorraine looked at Marcus with betrayal written across her face. Are you serious right now? And you're taking his side? I'm not taking sides, Marcus said quietly. I'm just saying that this interview stopped being professional about 10 minutes ago. Diana threw her hands up. This is ridiculous. We ask one challenging question, and suddenly we're the villains? This is exactly what's wrong with celebrity culture. Everyone's so fragile. Hugh paused on his way toward the exit, turning back one more time. You didn't ask challenging questions. You made attacks. There's a profound difference. A challenging question would be asking me about the technical difficulties of transitioning between genres, or how I prepared for a dramatically different role, or what I learned from working with this particular director. Those would be challenging questions. What you did was simply try to diminish me. Lorraine crossed her arms. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Are you? Hugh asked. Because that's the thing about non-apologies. They're quite transparent. You're not sorry about what happened. You're sorry I'm calling you out on it. The floor manager had appeared, looking panicked, whispering urgently to someone with a headset. Hugh's publicist had materialized at his elbow, her face pale. Hugh, the publicist said softly. We should go. He nodded. Yes, I think that's best. Lorraine made one last attempt to regain control. You realize this will be terrible publicity for your film, right? Walking off a show like this? Hugh stopped, looked back at her with something almost like pity. The film will speak for itself. It doesn't need to be promoted on a platform where the host thinks ambush tactics are acceptable. And you know what? I suspect there are plenty of other shows, real shows with hosts who actually care about their guests and their work, who will be happy to have a genuine conversation about it. This is such a mistake, Diana called out as he moved toward the door. You're going to regret this. Hugh didn't even turn around. The only thing I regret is wasting my morning being treated with such contempt by people who should know better. People who should know better? Lorraine called after him, her voice echoing off the studio walls. We're journalists. We ask hard questions. Hugh stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. He turned back one final time. No. You're entertainers who forgot the difference between asking hard questions and being hard on your guests. There's a world of difference. Sarah stood there, looking mortified. Hugh, I really am sorry. He paused, offering her a small, sad smile. I know you are, Sarah. I appreciate that. But I think you might want to reconsider the company you keep. And with that, Hugh Grant walked off the set. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence of the studio. The camera operators didn't know where to point. The lights seemed too bright suddenly, exposing every uncomfortable expression on every face. Lorraine sat back down heavily in her chair, her face still flushed. Well, she said to no one in particular, that was unexpected. Diana was already pulling out her phone, no doubt preparing to spin the story on social media. Marcus sat quietly, staring at his hands. Sarah looked like she might cry. The floor manager finally found his voice. But we're going to need to go to commercial. But the damage was done. In those final moments before they cut away, the cameras captured everything. Lorraine's forced smile, Diana's defiant expression, Sarah's genuine distress, Marcus's quiet disapproval. Outside the studio, Hugh's publicist was already on her phone, doing damage control, making calls, rearranging the day's schedule. But Hugh himself seemed strangely calm. He'd removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and was taking deep breaths of the cool morning air. That was, his publicist said, searching for words. That was quite something. Yes, Hugh agreed. It was. Are you okay? He considered the question for a moment. Actually, yes, I am. I stood up for myself. I refused to be treated poorly. That feels rather good, to be honest. Back inside the studio, they were still scrambling. Someone suggested they could salvage the segment, maybe bring in a different guest, pretend the whole thing never happened. But everyone knew that was impossible. This would be the story. Not the film. Not the other guests they had lined up. This moment. This confrontation. Lorraine stood up, smoothing down her dress. "Right then," she said with forced brightness. "Let's regroup. We've got a show to finish." But her hands were shaking slightly. Diana was scrolling through her phone with increasing fervor. Marcus had excused himself, claiming he needed some air, and Sarah was still sitting there, looking at the empty chair where Hugh had been sitting just minutes before. "Lorraine," Sarah said quietly, "we were really harsh on him." Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. "He's a celebrity. He can handle it." "Can he, though?" Sarah pressed. "I mean, should he have to? We basically told him his entire career was a joke, and he's delusional for trying to grow as an artist. How is that fair?" "Oh, don't start," Diana snapped. "He came on a talk show. Talk shows have opinions. If he can't handle that, he shouldn't do interviews." "There's having opinions and then there's being cruel," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "And we crossed that line. Multiple times." The production assistant approached tentatively. "We're back in 2 minutes. Do we have a plan?" Lorraine plastered on her professional smile. "We acknowledge what happened briefly, then move on to the next segment. No big deal." But it was a big deal. Everyone in that studio knew it. The crew had witnessed the whole thing. The cameras had captured every uncomfortable moment. And somewhere out there, viewers had just watched one of Britain's most beloved actors being systematically torn down by a host who seemed more interested in scoring points than having a real conversation. The countdown began again. 3, 2, 1. Lorraine took a breath and addressed the camera. "Well, as you just saw, Hugh Grant has decided to leave our show. We here believe in honest conversation, and sometimes that means things get a bit heated. We wish him all the best with his new film." Her words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Sarah was still looking at her hands. Diana had that defiant set to her jaw, and the empty chair across from them seemed to grow larger with every passing second, a physical reminder of what had just transpired. Outside, Hugh's car was pulling away from the studio. Inside, he was already fielding calls from concerned colleagues, from other journalists wanting to hear his side, from friends who had somehow already heard what happened. But for now, in this moment, he was simply sitting in the back seat, watching the studio disappear in the rearview mirror, feeling oddly liberated. Because sometimes, standing up and walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. Sometimes, refusing to participate in your own diminishment is the only real choice. And sometimes, the most professional thing you can do is to recognize when a situation has become untenable and remove yourself from it with whatever grace you can muster. 25 seconds. That's all it had taken. 25 seconds for a dismissive comment to spiral into something bigger. 25 seconds to ignite a confrontation that would be talked about for days, weeks, maybe longer. 25 seconds to prove that even the most polished, professional television shows can crumble when basic respect and decency are abandoned in favor of gotcha moments and cheap shots. What happens when a beloved actor is pushed too far by a host more interested in being provocative than professional? What happens when rudeness masquerades as honesty? What happens when someone finally says enough? This happens. This exact moment. Hugh Grant standing up, removing his microphone, and walking away from a show that had stopped being about conversation and had become about confrontation. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that dignity is not something you have to sacrifice for publicity, that respect is not negotiable, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply leave.